1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to Immigrants and Exiles, a podcast series between me, Walter, and my friend Moreno, the sons of Italian migrants. Today, we chat with Niki Baras, a long-standing friend of Moreno's. She's a translator and interpreter, a union organiser, and she's worked as an academic. She's a dynamic thinker and a workplace activist.
Niki, tell us about your mum and dad, where they came from.
My mum and dad came from Greece in the post-war migration wave.
What part of Greece?
Southern Greece, far down south in the regions. And they came separately. My father came first and my mother came later. They grew up in neighbouring villages, and I'm talking like really remote villages.
Did they know each other there?
Yeah, they did. In fact, it's really cute. I have a book that is the history of my father's village that the community have put together. It's a lovely coffee table book.
A lot of migrants have written books or have books about
this. But this is exceptional in that the community in Greece got together in more modern times, in recent times, and they formed a very active community in historical society, and they've put this book together. And there was a photo of a wedding that took place 40s, 50s, probably the early 50s. And I showed it to my mum. She was looking through the book and she said, I went to that wedding. That's where I first sighted your father. Neither of them are in the photo.
Of course, they say things like that because it's impossible to disprove.
Correct.
But they were everywhere, in every photo.
Absolutely. It's kind of fun. And that also speaks to that whole chain migration business where everybody knew everybody, maybe externally. I'm thinking of the Greek word. They recognised their faces, but they didn't know each other very well. But coming and forming a community here created the opportunity to meet properly.
Just
and
go
the rest
back a
is
bit.
history.
Just go back.
Yeah.
They're in Greece.
They're in Greece.
What makes them decide to come here? And was it your father who decided to come here?
They came independently of one another. There was no plan in that.
Why? Why did your father come here?
Post-war, regional school had been interrupted.
1950s, what?
1956. Lack of opportunity, there'd been no education, it'd been disrupted by war. My father came from a very poor family, poor by virtue of having lost his father at a young age and not having a breadwinner. And my father had to become the breadwinner for his family. And so what that meant was he had to seek work elsewhere. Very typical story. But came to Australia.
He came to Australia for a better
life.
For a better life, Niki.
You know, this is the standard line. I think my father didn't speak a lot about his past. What I know of him, I know from my mother. I think my father came here to leave his past behind. Because it was too sad. It was too sad.
Too sad. Okay.
Too sad. And interestingly, that opinion I hold now is evidenced by what I observed when he developed Alzheimer's, and the things that he was saying and doing lead me to think that there was a lot of sadness that went before.
Can I ask a question there? Because that's interesting.
Speak up.
I would like to ask a question because it's interesting. If people migrated to leave things that were sad in their past behind them, it's interesting that they wanted to create or recreate communities that they left behind that presumably would reconnect them back into some kind of sadness from the past. You know, it's a paradox.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation.
Because otherwise you'd lose yourself in this new adventurous reality.
My dad came here with his best friend, and to see them in photos from the era, they too look like two very cool dudes, two really well-dressed cool dudes. And as a kid, I would marvel at the suits and bow ties in their passport photo, and until I discovered three of them had the same outfit on in their passport photo. And then my dad said that was because none of us had a suit. There was one suit and it belonged to the photographer.
Beautiful. Fantastic. I'll tell you something about clothes. My dad arrived in Australia with very nice clothes in his suitcase, a few choice items. He had handmade two-tone shoes. He had a nice jacket. He had a foulard scarf that he used to wear. The minute he arrives here, for as long as he was in Melbourne and going to dances and so on here with my mum, because they were already married, it was fine. But the minute they got to the country, he had to stop wearing things like that because they called him a sissy.
Yeah, of course they did.
He stopped wearing these elegant clothes, my dad. The shoes, I ended up using the shoes to walk out to the chicken coop to feed the chooks on the farm and give them water and stuff. That's where
Speaking of sad things,
that's where
my mum would say when she first arrived that the Italians who had come before were quite dapper and well dressed, while the locals were carrying their shoes home in their hand. And then you think about the stories about the 6 o'clock swill after the pub.
The Australian locals. Well, the girls still do that now, the ones who go out for the Tuesday night cheap eats at the local hotel. Yep. You see them walking their shoes, but not on their feet, walking them on their shoulders, before they get to the hotel. Yep. Then they do whatever they've got to do in the hotel, meet the guys, and on the way home they've taken the shoes off again.
So your mum and dad met here?
They met here.
How did your mum get here? She's a young woman.
My mum was 19. My mum...
no children yet?
No. They don't know each other yet. So my uncle came here, and you know, I mean, what's an accurate story about why and how? Because there's so much bias in people's retelling of history. But also when it comes to families, even more so, I think. And I think of my mother. My mother came here to follow her brother. So my grandfather had 4 daughters. One was still very young. So his 3 elder daughters had all been farmed out from an early age to help the family.
Agricultural background, farmed out.
Yeah, literally, my mother was the only one that had the opportunity to learn a trade, but that meant living on her own or eventually boarding with the family from the age of 10.
And what did she learn?
She learned to be a seamstress.
Seamstress, I was going to say.
What else?
Yeah.
Very typical. Her sisters were working as servants, as I understand it. So she considered herself fortunate to at least have had that opportunity. Yeah. So my grandfather couldn't provide a dowry for his 3 girls. Yep. His elder son, my uncle, had been running a business in town that was, from all accounts, doing okay. But everybody was talking about immigrating and the opportunities, and so everyone was, I don't know what the mood was, but whatever it was, he shut shop and he moved to Australia with his wife and his mother-in-law, and they set up here. And as it was the way in those days, my grandfather decided that his elder son was now responsible for his sisters. And so the 3 girls were sent out here and for their brother to look after them, who I suspect could not wait to get them married off his hands. Rightly so. So it's interesting when you go back to the stories of what has been maybe passed down, what the offspring have interpreted about the why. There's stories of, you know, Grandpa was the bad guy for sending his daughters abroad. Uncle was lumbered with them. You talk to the sisters, they have different versions. It was all true, but at the end of the day, growing up, what I saw was a very loving, close family.
So your mum...
I think she was 19.
19, okay.
Yeah, I think. Well, she was very young. And then, so she ran away with my father.
From here?
Yeah, she met my father here, because small world, and they eloped. Because my uncle had greater aspirations and hoped that she would marry up a little bit. No, she fancied my dad, and they eloped. And my uncle and my dad ended up the best of friends, and
that's good.
As that often happens. My dad was very well loved.
Did they have a rough time? Was there any racism, any bias that they came
Oh
across?
yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot.
I guess, you heard about it. I'll tell you one story. In the 1970s,
In the 70s,
in the
wow.
70s, my mother was coming home from work, and she was heading off to catch the tram, and she was beaten up by a bunch of women
Oh my God.
on the street because she was a wog.
Okay. And they could tell. They
and
could tell she was a wog.
Yep, they could tell. And people she knew, business owners, Greek business owners, came out onto the street and watched it happen and did not intervene. And when it was over, she had to get on the tram and come home, and then my father took her to the police. So that was probably the most significant event that I saw in my lifetime.
Yeah. But like in their normal daily routine, did they come across some kind of bias? I mean, my parents, not my parents specifically, but Italians were referred to as Mediterranean scum, right? In Australian society and in the literature, in the journals, magazines, Mediterranean scum. They were even compared to the Chinese, because the Chinese were bad. They were the Chinese of Europe, the Italians. And the other thing about the Italians, and then the Greeks, the Italians were considered as bad as, inverted commas, blacks, okay?
Wow.
And when they became accepted as white, the Greeks took over. The Greeks became the new blacks. And there's always a group that comes afterwards
Always.
that becomes the new blacks.
And the worst of it is the groups that came before
Well, of course.
turn on the new
Yeah.
groups. Yes, there was discrimination and racism. We knew about it. I don't remember my parents, other than that incident, I don't remember my parents talking a lot about it.
Yep.
But Walter, you asked earlier about forming community, leaving community and forming community, and I'd suggest that that's probably why. And people sticking to their own. And I remember my older brother who felt it, and most of his friends were of the same background, whereas I came later and I had a more diverse group of friends. Diverse, not really diverse, more Anglo-Australian friends. But my brother tended to stick with his own, and he said he felt safer. And interestingly, he didn't look like a wog, like
Okay.
I look like a wog.
Yeah.
Wog, inverted
Yes.
commas.
Yeah.
It's
What?
before this talk of this talk about movement, people leaving one country to go to another country,
Yeah.
and giving all these sociological explanations that we're doing.
Yeah.
It just makes me return to the zoological explanation.
Yeah.
Human beings are animals.
Yeah.
Zoologists, scientists,
Yeah.
put us in the category at the top of
Yes.
the zoological scale,
Yep.
supposedly the most intelligent.
Yeah.
Animals are always on the move, sometimes to sort of feed,
Yep.
to get out of bad weather. We do the same thing,
Yep.
but we also do it psychologically and emotionally. So we go from one circumstance looking for a better circumstance, but we end up in the same circumstance, often created by ourselves.
Yep.
And so I'm thinking it's like we suffer from restless legs, and we live in illusions, right? Because we repeat these situations that we try to escape, but in fact we imprison ourselves again. So I don't know why we do what we do. It's in our program.
Well, they come for a better life, Walter.
But I think but that's just an illusion, because they can't recreate a better life. And
Niki wouldn't agree with you.
and they may materially improve things, right? And they meet somebody better than they were supposed to be connected to back home if they'd followed orders, right? But in reality, how well do those relationships develop? It still comes back to the individual and their ability to understand their partner, and that would have been true over there too.
It goes to education. I think that resonates for me when I think about Greeks specifically and their long history of migration.
Yep.
I mean, they very early immigrants and everywhere, in all corners of the earth.
They went to America too, didn't they?
They went to
Lots of
America.
them did,
My grandfather went to America.
Yeah.
But you know, when they do this chain migration, and I saw this with my dad's family. You know, some stayed in. Most of them stayed in Italy when they left Egypt.
Yeah.
Some came to Australia, and I think so many tensions and arguments here. Periods when they wouldn't speak to each other for 6 months, and then suddenly get back together again. Or sometimes, in the case of others, you know, animosities would last a generation. You go, what the hell do you think you've created in this reality called Australia? And don't blame Australia or Australians.
No. Displacement. Blame displacement, blame lack of education. I mean, they don't. I look at my family and I feel that I grew up in a time where we were taught to take responsibility for ourselves, to reflect on ourselves, to look outwards, critical thinking. They did. I mean, my parents didn't go to school. They didn't do basic, elementary subjects, let alone, critical thinking or any of those things. And I mean, I don't even know if people here are doing those sorts of things at school
and
anymore.
Even educated people still suffer from the same kind of complexes and phobias that you're describing.
Yeah,
I mean, some of the worst people, worst in inverted commas, that I've ever had to deal with are other academics when I was in academia. And I loved, on the other hand, hanging out with my wife's relatives coming from a peasant background because they understood the simplicities of life.
Niki, I don't have any Australian friends.
Yeah,
Okay.
you do. You just don't.
No,
Wow, come on.
I've been here since 1958, okay? I'm 69 years old. I don't have any Australian friends. I go to the football with Greeks and Italians, okay? That's who I go to the football with. Walter is my best friend, and he's Italian, okay? And he comes from Alexandria, Egypt. So, no, his father does, sorry.
My father does, of course. I grew up in Iran.
And, yeah, his father, I don't know. Anyway, I don't have any Australian friends.
It's interesting.
Why? Do you?
How do you define
Do you?
Australian?
Good question.
Now she's got.
Tell
yeah.
me, go for it.
How do you define Australian?
Did you ever carry this idea around in your head that there was you and your family, and then there were the Australians? Was that ever a thing in
No,
your
but
life?
my mum did.
Your mum did. Okay. And what did you think of that? And it never occurred to you, right?
No, it did occur to me. Of course,
It did occur to you.
Of course, it
Well,
occurred
tell me
to
all
me.
about
An
that.
intelligent woman we got here, an
all
intelligent
about
human
that.
being.
Go.
It did occur to me.
Yeah. Australians and Greeks.
Well, I said
And
earlier.
you.
I
Yeah.
said earlier. My brother didn't have, and I use quotes, in air quotes,
Yeah.
Australian friends. People who had been born in this country, people who had lived here for a few generations at least. I remember, and I digress consciously. I remember, and it still happens. I had a friend in high school who had an Anglo-sounding name. In fact, it was a German name. Her family had a German background from generations ago, and I remember the Greek mums referred to her as the German.
The German
girl.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I remember it made an impression on me, and it still does, how they latch on to that little bit of something other than Anglo to connect or to identify with.
Sure.
And the same thing would happen with Scots. Scots were seen as being like them.
Yeah.
English, no, not so much.
Yeah.
And I remember being interested in all of that language and perception of things. And then even my husband, whose grandfather came from Italy, so he's got a bit of Italian on one side and English on the other. When we were in Greece, my cousins, who were born and raised and have always lived in Greece, were attuned to this peculiarity of Australian Greeks and their attachment to something European. Very quickly latched on and referred to him as the Italian.
The Italian, yes.
And if you go further back, what does it mean to be English?
Yes.
The history of the Angles, coming from northern Germany. What does it mean to be Italian? I mean, I'm actually, to be honest, I'm of mixed ethnicity. If I go beyond my immediate parents, I'm sure it's true for Moreno too. You know?
No,
I tend
It's
to.
not.
no.
Oh, well, we go back.
My ancestors, you might go back, we're Etruscan. If
Etruscans,
you go back
yeah,
far enough.
Do you know what I think? I don't think it's about being Greek or Italian, at least as far as that sort of post-war immigrant route.
Yeah.
It's a little
Yeah.
bit different now because there's a lot of other forces at work.
Yeah.
But I think of it as a culture of immigrants. It's immigrant culture. It's not what country you originated from, especially when it comes to European migration. And I remember sharing a house with a friend who had come from New South Wales. His family were farmers for a couple of generations, and he did things around the house. And I remember one day noticing he had a pot, a saucepan, and he wrapped it in a tea towel and tied the tea towel in knots on the top. And I said, that's what my mother does. Like, where'd you get that from? He said, this is what we've always done.
Yeah.
And it was then that I started to think about, this was not about being Greek or Italian. This was about being an agricultural family. This was about coming from somewhere other than the city. And that there were so many things in common. There were more things in common than differences. And class, city, country, work, education, I think they're the factors that we have in common across cultures.
That's probably true, yeah.
Rather than, and focusing on those things make us more the same than different.
This would explain why I get on better with Greeks and Arabs. I'm more likely to make friends among people like that than among the descendants of the English and the Irish in Australia. Walter doesn't have any Australian friends either. He's going to
I don't have any friends
now. Sorry?
I don't have any friends.
Yeah, that's because you couldn't find any Australian ones.
People resent me.
Yeah.
I say aloof,
Yeah,
smart ass.
Yeah.
He's a know-it-all. Go, well, if I know it all, don't you want to know it too? I'll give it to you for free.
Maybe you have more select friends.
If I meet a Greek,
I do. I
they're
choose
likely to have
wisely.
had they're likely to have had immigrant parents or grandparents. They've got a similar experience going back to mine.
You know what it is? It's a kind of broader philosophical intelligence too. You bring so many experiences.
Go abstract on me. You're going.
It's all about understanding the ideas rather than just repeating the experiences. Because people repeat experiences almost like mantras, you know. Or the catechism, you go to church. I go, I don't want to repeat the catechism of life, you know. I want to say, stop. What do these words mean? Lamb of God, the Holy Trinity.
Yeah. But listen, I've written a whole book about this stuff. Okay. And it's not the truth. Okay. I'm not going to maintain that it's the truth, but it's the experience that some people have had, which we ignore. We ignore it, okay? The fact that Italians were called Mediterranean scum, okay? The fact that they were called the Chinese of Europe, because Chinese was a dirty word. The fact that they were seen as blacks, because blacks were dirty words. You know, blacks was a dirty word. And the fact that they got replaced by the Greeks after they became white.
That hasn't
You know?
changed. Now you look on
Think about the Sudanese.
Yeah, they're copying it
Yeah.
now. Look on social media. I mean, just a glance at social media. Oh, you know, why can't these new immigrants be like the Greeks and the Italians?
Yeah.
And I just want to jump through the screen and say, shut up.
Yeah.
Like, you know, since when? Since you started eating salami? Like, piss off.
Yes.
Yes. Right, but this is what happens. And I remember reading a story of one woman, I think she was African, and she was saying, how do I protect my child from the racism they're experiencing at school? And a guy, Greek, Italian, European background, came in and said, you know, I came from an immigrant family. It's okay. It'll take a few decades, but then, you know, you'll be the good guys again. And she said, why do I need to wait a couple of decades?
Yeah, I don't want
So that we get a new group to oppress before we can actually have some understanding.
And which category of good guys are you going to belong to? Because if there aren't good guys amongst the later generations that have, or the earliest generations that have come here, you know, whoever they are, Scottish, Irish, whatever, English background, and they're not good guys. And if we're going to become like them, then we're going to be bad guys as well.
The
What kind of sense is
understanding
that?
seems to be that every new group that comes along is worse.
Yeah.
And so once you've been here and you've earned your stripes,
Yep.
you can just kick the shit out of the next person coming in. And then they move up the ladder and on it goes.
So your mum and dad came for a better life. They found it?
If you talk to my mother today, she'd say no.
She'd say no. Why would she say no? What happened to
She
her?
has always maintained it was not her choice. And I agree. It
Because
wasn't
her father sent her
Her
here.
father sent
to
her
live
here.
with
She
an
was a
uncle.
young woman, her brother, to live with her brother.
Her brother, yep,
and
okay.
get married off. She will say that. Very negative, my mother. She will say
Maybe
that.
she's telling the truth, Niki.
Yeah, she didn't have a choice.
Yep.
She didn't get to study.
Yeah.
She wanted to study.
Yep.
And I remember her saying it to me one time, when you're having those teenage battles with your parents.
Yeah.
She said, I never had any say in my life. I'll be damned if I'm not going to let you do whatever you want.
Ah, okay.
So that set the tone,
Yep,
something
yep,
to
yep.
that effect. That set
Okay,
the tone for
okay.
our relationship forever
Yep.
after.
Yeah.
Because I'm probably just like her.
And yet, the Australians who look at your mum's life, okay, would be thinking, she's lucky that we let her in and that she was allowed to come here and live here. Wouldn't they? They'd be,
Not the people in my world.
Not the people in
not
your
the
world.
people that
the people who don't know her very well, the way you do and the way you just told us
I don't
now.
know. She's pretty well liked.
She was liked.
She's pretty well
Okay.
liked by people outside the Greek community,
Okay.
and
So they think she found a better life, don't they?
yeah.
But she doesn't.
She doesn't because she's she's old now. She's experienced a lot of loss and grief.
Sure.
She's very negative about it. She's old. There's chronic pain. There's
Yep.
strong meds. So all these
Yep.
things affect her thinking.
Yep.
But I remember growing up, it was, always drummed in. Always very open about this was not my choice.
Yep.
This is not where I wanted to be.
Yep.
And like a lot of migrants, there was always an idea that they would go home.
Ah, okay. And what happened?
Don't think my dad ever wanted to go home,
No.
but aside from that, they had a family. They
Did-
put down roots.
Yeah.
You're listening to the Immigrants and Exiles podcast series with Walter and Moreno. In part 2, we continue our chat with Moreno's friend Niki Baras. It's a fascinating and busy discussion, not about Italians but Greeks. And yet the connections and overlaps are so obvious, like going home. Well, it's never quite the solution to life's problems, is it?
Did they try to go back?
No, never.
They never went back?
Oh, they went for visits. My mother went back for the first time after 20 years
Wow.
since arrival.
That's not
And
gonna work.
My father did not go back for almost
Yeah.
almost 30 years.
Yep. Yeah.
And we had to push him on the plane. We had
Yeah.
to force him to go.
It's not easy to go back.
No.
It actually hurts.
Yeah.
It's painful. I've known lots of people who go back and wish, I'm never going again.
I have memories of super dramatic airport scenes when family members were going back and the whole clan would go to the airport to see them off. And it was the memory.
Yes. Okay, go on.
And I recall those airport scenes being highly emotional.
Yeah.
And you're going on a holiday, like, what's your problem?
Yes.
But then, as kids, and I think migrant kids do that, and it's evident in those comedies and parodies that we don't like
Wogs at
Moreno.
work. Yep. Wogs at
We
work.
ended up making fun of that, and when we got older, and every time we went to the airport, we'd simulate the dramatic scenes
yes. Yeah.
of departures,
Yeah.
and one of
Well,
our
you do
own
that to
going home.
protect yourself
You
in a
do
way,
it to
you
protect
know?
yourself.
Yeah.
But it always made an impression on me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never really understood it as a kid.
You never went back with your parents?
I went back with my mum when I was 12.
Okay.
Yeah. Her first trip back.
What was that like? 12 was a good age.
It was daunting.
Yeah.
It was daunting. I went to a village with a squat toilet, not a toilet, a squat hole in the ground.
Yes.
And a, 6.5 foot tall grandfather with a long beard and a black gown and very imposing.
Yeah.
It was all very weird.
Yes.
As a 12-year-old. But I ended up I got used to it and I ended up loving it.
Yeah. Yeah, similar thing happened to me. I mean, it was weird at the start. My grandfather was toothless, my great aunt was toothless, and then I just grew to love them. My great aunt was scary because she had a thyroid problem. She was so skinny. She looked like a walking skeleton and she scared the shit out of me the first time I saw her. And within a few weeks, she was my favourite human being.
Yeah.
She used to give me food. God. It was brilliant.
I went back, I got married in that village, in my mother's village, the one that made me sad and was daunting at 12.
Yeah.
I went back and had my wedding there.
Yes.
And I remember getting there and thinking, what was I thinking? Like, this place makes me really sad.
Yes.
Why am I here? And then I decided, and I think that's what you need to do, decided that, great, we're having a really good time here. I had a whole lot of my friends, my Australian friends.
So you took them too?
They came over. Well, they
so
invited
your mum as
themselves.
well?
Mum went over. Yeah, she organised it all.
Okay.
And we had this fantastic time. And we, put a really happy stamp in that place.
Yep. Yeah.
So you can make connections outside of your ethnic circles, can't you?
Of course,
Absolutely
some of us can.
Oh, listen, that's
Some
what
of us
we're
can't.
encouraged to do. No, we're encouraged to do that, and we're told that it's good for you, but it doesn't always happen, does it? There are a lot of people who come for a better life, don't find it, whose lives fall in a heap.
Yeah, but
when they do that.
Depends what you want.
Yes, it does depend on
It
what you
depends
want.
on so many things.
Yes.
But
What's
the
a
general understanding is, I have this image of happy little Italian migrants on Australia Day. This is going back years now. I was little, but you would see them in the news straight after their citizenship ceremony. Okay, and I'm sure it happens now with the Sudanese or whatever other people that are supposedly migrants. They're standing in front of the camera with their citizenship certificate. The husband,
That makes me sad too.
is short, the wife is shorter, and the two little kids as well. And they're all holding their citizenship certificates. And if the reporter asks them, why'd you come here? They say, for a better life. I came here for a better life. What else are they going to say?
What are they going to say?
else
But
are
it's
they
a
going to
simple-
say?
But what does it mean? And I think Walter nailed it materially.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
It's a
politically for a lot of
simple
people today.
answer.
It's a better life materially, but is it a better life in any other sense? Well, it's very individual, isn't it?
Very
course it
individual,
is.
and people don't want to spend a
there
lot
is-
of time
And
thinking.
it's not
It's
just
also
individual.
cultural, though.
It's
It's
not
also
just
cultural.
individual. It's about a lot of individuals.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's
that it
also about
affects.
values. It's also about
definitely.
values. So
Yeah.
a better
Yeah.
life, I know in the community, the Greek community, a better life is educating your children,
Yep.
your children getting married to the right person,
Yep.
having grandchildren,
Yep.
those traditional family values.
Yep. Well, in my case,
Yeah.
my parents' peers, all the people in our village who didn't emigrate, they lived in their houses, they got married, they sent their kids to university, they had cars, they went to the beach in summer, and you think, okay, so what did my parents achieve by coming here?
Well, that's what they would ask
You know?
themselves, and that's what a lot of
Exactly.
the post-war European migrants
Yep.
ask
Yep.
themselves that. But and I heard it in my family. Well, I left, and they're kind of better off. They've got a holiday house. They've
Yep.
got better climate. They do all these things.
Yep.
But they asked, well, not my dad so much, but my mum. Well, what did I achieve by coming here?
Yep.
But my cousin in Greece was interesting. Same one that calls my husband the Italian.
Yep.
He said, well, Greece deported, effectively deported its workforce. It's
Yes.
young, it's youth,
got a
basically.
communist grandfather,
And all
yeah.
the oldies stayed back. And it was
Yep.
only the grandparents who stayed back in the villages.
Yep.
They got rid of, there was a mass exodus of all the lifeblood of the country
Yep.
post-war.
Yep.
So You know, they're still not a wealthy country, but
No.
the few that were left to rebuild it did get those opportunities.
And I
But
think
I have a communist uncle
yeah,
who's always said to us that the Italian state failed the people by sending so many away because they couldn't give them a living.
well, they couldn't sustain them.
That's-
Moreno.
They couldn't sustain
post-war.
their own
Yeah.
population after the war.
What could they
Yeah.
do?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
sure there
but-
was a lot of individual. There was a lot of individual
motivations.
motivation for doing
Sure.
that too, because you know
Yeah.
the West was calling.
Yeah,
And in my dad's case, he wanted to get some adventure into his life.
Yeah, but your
This
dad-
was the driving
yeah.
force for my dad.
Your dad left the farm and came out
And
To do
worked
the
on
farm.
and worked on the farm.
Yes, repeat the mistakes of the past.
Yeah.
or not a mistake. Why is it a mistake?
It's just a cliche to try
Yeah.
and capture how the
Yeah.
human behaviour is repetitive.
It
When
is,
my dad,
yeah.
at 89 years of age, used to ask me whether he did the right thing by coming to Australia, guess what I used to say to him? Of course you did. What are you going to tell an 89-year-old man? You know?
Whatever you want to.
Huh?
Unless you're being an 89-year-old man and you're saying that, and you want to continue
said, "Of course you
carrying
did the right
illusions into the grave.
Of course
Yeah.
My parents were completely atypical. They left high-powered careers to come here just because my father was already married over there. And then, of course, it was a life of live over there all
was
the
married to
time,
someone
going
else.
back all the time.
What do you mean your father was married to someone else over here?
Over there
there.
in Italy.
Right.
So he
To someone
couldn't
else
be.
other than your mother?
Yes, I like the rhyme of it. To someone other than your mother. Yeah.
So hang on. I mean, I think coming from Egypt in that era is again a different cultural
course.
experience.
Yeah. And he marries in Rome.
So your father left Egypt
He left Egypt to take up his scholarship to study at uni.
and so essentially left your family, your mother and you, and started a new life in Rome?
No. He went as an 18-year-old to Italy
Right.
with a scholarship. He studied in Naples, went to Rome, joined the Bank of Rome, and a high-powered career there. In the meantime, before he meets my mother, he marries one of the daughters of the landlady where he was living.
Oh, okay. Yep. I'm with
Then
you.
he leaves that wife because he meets my mum.
Right, okay.
So-
So it was in sequence.
And then
It sounded different when you said it before.
Yeah, I'm crazy. They come here, and then after a little while, he's not satisfied, but she's very unhappy because she used to be a model and a fashion designer in Rome. So then we start this movement backwards and forwards, especially myself, sometimes with my mum, rarely with my dad, buy an apartment just outside Rome to definitely move back in the, what would that be, in the 90s, and then they change their mind again for different reasons. So stay here. So I'm a bit of a lost soul. But in the meantime, it makes for wanting to think about what is going on in life and what is life. What are people's expectations? When they speak, are they just repeating tropes? Are they repeating views that they've inherited while they're trying to escape those views?
The trope I've grown up with is the better life one, right?
Yeah,
and the poverty and
my parents
wars.
came here
But
to make a worse life,
It's not-
materially.
But I don't understand. I want to know, what was the sales pitch? What was the sales pitch to convince two people who already had careers in what was a country that was, well, if you look at the movies, fabulous and thriving.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not sure what era you're talking about, but I'm assuming it's
In the
it's
50s,
it is
yeah.
the 50s.
Well,
Yeah, people
Italy
will-
didn't have divorce till 1975, so he
Right.
paid maintenance money to his ex-wife, even when she was
they-
his ex-wife.
They had careers during that time.
Yeah.
Good careers in their own country where they
Yeah.
were lived. What was the sales pitch that got them to leave all that behind and come here for?
Well, my father's mother had moved to Australia with two of her daughters after they all left Egypt. Most of the others, and there were 14 kids in the family, his father stayed in Egypt.
Right.
And most of them moved to Milan, some in Rome. His mother didn't want to stay in Italy, so she came to Australia.
Right.
He had that calling, the call of the wild, the call of the
Family,
womb, whatever.
yeah.
But he had most of the families over there. However, in my mother's case, they didn't accept my father because he was a married guy. He's a bigamist.
Oh, yes,
right?
of course, yeah.
So it was a form of escape, not looking for adventure.
Right, so he had to get away from where
and
he was
emotional
known.
attachment to the mother.
Yeah.
And this brings me back to what it is that motivates human beings. You say a better life, but I think people whip out expressions, right? Because they're little labels.
Well, I guess, it's when and where you say it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's not as straightforward as people think.
No.
Okay?
No, not at all.
That's probably the main point. It's not as straightforward. And the story that's told, this generic story that's told about migrants, there's always another story. Okay? We only ever hear one. Little picture, smiling little migrants.
So when the reporter sticks the microphone at you and says, so what made you come to Australia? The subtext, the speech bubble is piss off, none of your business.
That's right, I was going to say fuck off.
Yes.
None of your business.
Yeah.
But
I want a better life.
We're actually animalistically driven,
Yeah.
We're looking for something...
Well, if I was a modern, more recent migrant, most probably a refugee, when they asked me what brought you to Australia, I'd probably be thinking, don't you read the paper?
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Don't you, are you aware of global events?
There are
and
wars,
what
there
else
are
do you think
natural
of?
disasters.
That's right.
Yeah.
There's a different kind of thing there. But my parents didn't have to do what they did.
Yeah.
His probably didn't either.
They didn't... No.
And
Maybe yours were driven more to it.
I'd love for what that family with that photo to be able to turn around, for example, and say, well, I fled a war, I fled persecution, I was starving, I was getting bombed everywhere. What do you reckon?
Yes.
Right? What do you reckon brought me here? Right?
Escape.
But they won't because they're polite
Let me
and they're
tell
scared and they're...
Yeah.
I've got to tell you a very quick story. In 2018, when I was doing the rounds of the Writers' Festivals, I was in Perth, for my first book, promoting it at the Writers' Festival. I got after my presentation, early evening, I got an Uber back to the hotel. Uber driver says to me, what are you doing here? What's your book about? I told him, and as we're driving back to the hotel, he tells me, I came from Afghanistan. He said, the way you're talking about your book now reminds me of my life back in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
We were being bombed. There was a war on. It was terrible. We would have no water. He says, but I lived in a house with my mother and father, my brother, his wife, their 2 kids, and there I was too, And every night we would sit down and eat together, and we all slept under the same roof. And he said, now tonight I go home and I eat by myself. He said, in a little apartment in Perth, he eats by himself.
Quiet despair.
He says, Australians are too independent, he said. He was missing the sense of community that he had in a war-torn part of the world. That's what he was missing,
Yeah, and
it goes back to people. It goes back to people. It goes back to people.
And I think this goes back to when we started these podcasts, and I was talking about Australia as a penal colony. Yeah. Prisoners live in isolation and in fear of their personal safety when they're in a prison. And even when they're outside, they form groups. They're protective groups. They're groups of convenience. And I find that that's how society is here. Whenever I've been in Italy, I've just felt at home with all the problems that are there. I like the fact that, I don't know, girls at a bus stop as you're going to school would say, hey, come over here, talk to us, what's your name? And you go, talk to them. And here in Australia, if you said, hello to somebody, what do you want?
So you had your schooling in Italy?
Some schooling in Italy,
and you've lived there.
Also here.
Yeah, that's why I remember, people I've met along the way who have grown up sort of half in one country and half in another.
Just
and
moving around.
There is that feeling of disconnect or a bit more connection in one country or another. In contrast, when I go to Greece, I feel a certain at-homeness, but I am not. I am a foreigner there, and I'm told I am a foreigner there, and they know I'm a foreigner there and I'm fluent in Greek, and they tell me my Greek is good, but they know from the way I use the language that I am not from there. I say please and thank you when I don't have to. People go to a place that is completely new to them, they've never been before, and they feel at home more than the place they came from.
Yeah.
Again, you know, what makes you feel at home?
It's knowing yourself. That's what I found, and I realised that even when I was in Italy, that I was the outsider there because I was the one who was the student.
Yeah.
I was the one who went to the tertiary institution that nobody else ever went to.
Yeah.
And when I'd go, that was in Pisa, and when I'd go back to Rome, even when I was a kid, kids would give me their homework to do while they went off and played soccer.
Yeah.
And I was happy to do that.
It's a universal thing, right?
Yeah, or I'd come out of the bedroom and I've been reading some Gabriele D'Annunzio poetry, right? And I'd say, hey guys, in Italian, listen to this beautiful poem. And they'd be watching the Formula One in South Africa. I'd say,
Okay.
oh, get out of here. I'd get shoes thrown at me, you know. And I'd go, oh, yeah, sorry.
In Australia, you sound like what we would call a nerd.
Yeah.
And the nerd, the nerd experience is that,
Yes.
regardless of where
That's
you are.
right. And the thing is that when I had to hang out with nerds in the university system there, I didn't like it as much as I'd like to live around the more ordinary people of the family, you know, because they had qualities that I wish that I had. They could be normal, talk about the soccer
Or you felt like you wanted to fit in
and
with
so
that.
I'd talk the way they talk, you know, and I'd go away feeling refueled, you know. I wasn't a parasite. I needed something.
To fit in, you needed to know
Yeah,
you
I
fit
wanted
in,
to be
or that you
part.
could fit in.
Yeah, I didn't like the thing of being isolated just because
Or
I
being
like to do
different.
arty things, you
Yeah.
know, or like to think about things.
But you haven't fitted in much here, have you?
No, and that's the point. I understood that's just me, so I've come to terms
It's not
with
just
me
you.
as me.
Yeah.
It's your parents. It's
Yeah.
not just you.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy to talk about individuals, but I don't know about that.
I don't know.
You know?
It's like
I don't know.
it
I
is
don't know.
like I've got friends. I was thinking about this the other night. I was
Yeah.
with a friend who's, you know, very artsy and
Yep.
immersed in that world and has lots of friends in that world.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I remember wanting to sort of be
know what
in
you
that.
mean. Yeah.
I wanted
Yeah.
to be in that world,
Yeah.
but I didn't have the talent.
Yeah.
And I know now I didn't have enough interest
Yeah.
Yeah.
to be in that world. But I used to admire it, probably because of the clothes, probably because
Yes.
of, you know,
You know, my friend
the
George.
hovels that they lived in the garret, that whole
Yeah.
romantic.
My
Yeah,
friend
yeah,
George
yeah.
goes to the footy with me, okay? George
Yeah.
and I go to the football. Walter comes sometimes too. George was telling me the other day that when he goes to he's been on holiday in Italy with his wife, Maria. She's Italian, he's Greek. He comes back, he's depressed for 3 months when he comes back to Australia. You know, because they have nice long holidays. They're away for a month or two.
George needs a new job or something.
You know, now George is semi-retired now. He was a greengrocer and he's not working.
Plenty of money.
Anyway, he's depressed. He says he loves being in Italy. My son's just been away for 3 weeks. Simone's
Yeah.
come back with his partner Sally, and he's down in the dumps after being in Italy for 3 weeks and coming back here. Look, there's got to be an element of. He likes the fact that in Italy they call him Simone. Okay, he doesn't have to call himself Simon or anything like that. And you know, he talks about the places he was at, swimming in Cefalù.
Cefalù, oh yeah, in Sicily.
In Sicily, this beautiful
I'll
bay.
be there soon.
Yeah, but who doesn't love being
Beautiful
on
bay.
holiday?
He's depressed.
Who wouldn't love a
After
life of not having routine and structure and being on an endless
likes being
holiday
called
on the
Simone.
coast and being called by your real name
Yeah.
that your parents called you?
The first time I heard my name called out in the public square.
Weak latte.
Oh,
Marino-
Michael,
Marino.
thank you.
No, that's not me.
Who else would have the weak drink? Me.
Moreno. I heard Moreno.
Short black.
Oh, what?
Short
It wasn't
black,
me,
that's
it was
it.
someone else.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
thank you.
Well, not the teeth.
Because I got
That's-
Moreno.
Yeah, you get
Yeah,
Marino.
but you know, and I think it's important to bear in mind when you're trying to live dreams and the realities facing you. Like where I lived in Rome was one of the gangland areas, and I'm going to be spending part of my time in one of those gangland
Excellent.
areas again. Yeah, you know, people didn't get off. I always say didn't get off public transport unless they lived there, right, and walked
Yeah,
through the area
yeah.
because you'd be confronted by gangs. But I like the fact that you could be still respected to say, hey, don't touch him. He's studying, you know. Not like the rest of us bums were going to be stuck here
The
for the
old,
rest of it.
the old mafia code.
Yeah, a little bit. There's still a sense of community, you know. There's still dangers, absolutely. And you go there and I expect that somebody's going to try and pickpocket me, so I'm going to punch the hell out of them if they try it, and that sort of stuff. The animal in me comes out, but I feel more balanced than when I'm just being, you know, an academic or an artist.
Yeah.
And the same problems that I found trying to be an academic or an artist here was what I found over there. A lot of snobbishness, a lot of pretentiousness, and I didn't feel the love.
Yeah.
And I realised that I love my wife's kind of people who are a lot humbler and they're giving. You can turn.
He's a peasant at heart.
Well, I understand what you're saying because
I'm a
there's
peasant at heart.
it's almost like I like this, I like music, I like art, I like academia, I like all these things.
Yeah.
Why do you have to be
That's right.
in one or the other?
I don't.
And I think we do live in a society where people gravitate to their cultural groups. But I think it is possible to find people that share all those interests differently. And the people I was with the other night, there's more, why I enjoy them is there is a lot of discussion about things outside ourselves, but there's also at times a lot of discussions about because we're close friends and our personal stuff. And I like this group of people because they have interests and I can learn from them as well, but they are also able to be just ordinary and just talk about the stuff that affects them.
Yes, absolutely.
Or the crazy relative, or the, you know, the ailing parent, or just everyday stuff.
Look, I'm going to conclude. I think we have to
Conclude.
The thing that I miss most about living in Italy, and I've lived in Italy, and I've studied there, I lived with my grandparents, with my parents, with the village. The thing I miss is the sense of community. I have never been able to capture it here, okay? Could be my fault, whatever it is. Over there it was easy as anything, because it was there in front of you. It happened, it was normal, and that's what I miss.
Moreno, why haven't you and Anna
Why haven't I?
done that?
Yeah,
Take a year. Take a year.
Yeah. Oh, living there.
Live in Italy, write your book.
Yeah, look, it's not... it's
Half
not gonna
a year.
happen. Yeah, fair enough. But that's what I miss.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people that I talk to say they miss about Italy, the sense of community. Okay, we're better off materially here, where life is comfortable, life is easy, but the sense of community.
I
it's what
feel
my
sad.
brother misses.
Do you, may I ask a personal question? It's good to be at the end of our friendship.
Go ahead.
Do you like to suffer? I mean,
Possibly. I
Suffering
have a melancholy.
artist.
yeah, I don't
I have
like to
melancholy
suffer because I've
tendency.
suffered.
I
That's
enjoy
the-
melancholia.
That's the next
Yes.
episode. Melancholia amongst...
Yes.
Whereas I like to be combative and fierce and go down in the battle, you know,
To some
living
extent, though,
intensely.
The
And
melancholia.
I
is
feel
what
that
grew up with,
melancholia.
okay?
Yeah,
And
you
I
don't
use
have
that-
the melancholia?
I grew
Yeah.
up
I
with
do.
it.
So-
I
yeah,
do.
and I
Maybe
feel-
that's the next episode.
That's what I grew up in.
Melancholia.
I got it from my father. I got it from my mum.
It's like
Some
absent.
people call it intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, I don't like that. I like to think of melancholia like
so tell
absinthe.
me, you've got to give me a concluding statement about for a better life, okay?
Oh,
What do you
don't
think
put
about
this
the
pressure on her.
concept? Come on, she's a smart person. She'll do it.
No, she's
I
not.
I flip flop. I don't do one statement, one
Okay, do
one
two.
opinion.
2 or 3.
A better life. I think everyone would stay home if they really. I think everyone would be. I think.
Don't think, just say it.
I think everyone. Well, I think about migrants and refugees.
Yeah.
And mostly, they would have stayed home if they could.
And your mum and dad?
I think they would have stayed home if they could.
That's beautifully put. Really, fantastic.
Yeah.
I think that applies to my people too, to my parents.
I think my dad,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And the
my
could-
dad was a driving force in that.
But the could is loaded, right? The could is loaded. Like your dad couldn't because of social
That's right.
circumstances. My dad couldn't because of economic circumstances.
Yeah. It's not straightforward, is it?
and emotional. No, it's not straightforward.
Not straightforward,
But I
so-
do think, when I sort of read this anti-immigration sentiment, I get really cross, and I just think, you're ignorant morons. None of these people would be here
Yep.
if they could just stay home